Okay, so today, first session, sight, sunlight, shadows, overshadowing, and form generation. Let's now go straight into Revit. And what we're covering today is, in the first session, really this is our first session where we're actually starting to conduct simulation and analysis. The other sessions were more about kind of getting prepared for this, getting established in the software, starting to learn some tools. And now what we're going to start with is a hugely important aspect for architectural designers, and this is to start to simulate the path of the sun around your site. We were looking at the Heliodon last week, which is a physical piece of equipment which simulates the sun around a physical model. And I made reference in that session to the fact that you can also, of course, do this in the computer. So today, in the first session, we're going to look at how you would simulate the path of the sun in the computer. Okay? So, first thing we have, if we just maximize this view here, ZE, zoom extents. I'm just using the scroll wheel on the mouse there to zoom in a bit. So this is our site, and this Revit file will be made available for you. And all we have here is the basic topographical surface, which I demonstrated in the video last week. And so we're now imagining that we're in a practice situation. We have a design. We have a very initial stage design for our building. And now what we want to do is we want to use the software to, first of all, assess it in terms of sunlight overshadowing. So the important thing here is that we want to start testing that before we spend too much time making that design too detailed. It's kind of similar when we were talking last week about the physical models. If you invest 3 weeks making a physical model and then you test it, you're very reluctant to change it because you've invested all that time. So it's similar when you're working in the computer. The important thing is to start that testing early on, not to leave it to the end. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start first of all by just establishing some views in our Revit model. And as before, we have on the left here, we have our project browser, and I've docked it with our properties. So if you see here, we have these two tabs. And one of the videos from last week was explaining how you dock these palettes. Okay, if you have bigger screens, you don't need to dock them. You can have them spread out. But for now, we'll keep them docked. And the first thing we're going to do is just simply go to this 3D view here. Double click on that, and that is a 3D view which every Revit project has, and that's giving us, as you can see, a 3D view of our site. And let's just start to have a little look at some of the parameters. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit there. Okay, so as you can see, we've got our site, and we've also got switched on the sun path. Now, if you want to switch that off, it's one of these view settings down in the bottom left of the window. So if I switch the sun path off, just cancel that. So switch the sun path off, obviously it disappears. You still have the view of your model, but you don't have the sun path. Let's just switch that sun path on. And before we start doing any simulation of the sun, we want to check that we have our site in the correct part of the world. Okay? Very important. Occasionally people forget to do it, and you get some very strange results. Okay, so we'll just go back to this sun settings tab here, and we'll click on our sun settings. And it takes us into our initial sun settings dialog window. The first thing to do is to go up here and check your location. Now, as you can see, this is correctly set for Sheffield, but if it wasn't, you click in this little button here, and it takes you into a location service. And what you can do in here is you can type in a location into the box, and it will search for it, and it's finding the nearest weather stations to your location. Okay, so very easy to change your location anywhere in the world. Once you've accepted that, you click OK. Now I'm just going to cancel out of that because I don't want to change this to Paris. So just check, we're still in Sheffield, yes. Okay, great. So really important, once you've done that, hit save, and Revit will remember your location. Okay, you only need to do it once, and then it will always remember it. Okay, so we've set our location, and what I'm going to do first of all is we're just going to look at some very kind of intuitive tools for some quick analysis of the sun around your site. And then we'll move into some slightly more detailed tools in terms of outputting results for a report. So the first thing we can do here is we have our site. You can see our sun path hovering around our site, and you can see that we've got some shadows on there. And the first thing you can do is simply grab that sun and drag it. There's a little bit of a delay there, but you can just drag that around your site, just sort of intuitively drag it around and look at the effect of the shadows on your site. Okay, now we're locked at the moment. If you can just see here, we're locked on the 22nd of June. So what it's doing is it's allowing me to drag that sun throughout the day along that path of the sun, but it's locking it on the correct path for the 22nd of June. Okay, so very useful. 22nd of June is the middle of summer. Drag that up there, and you just have a very sort of quick way of dragging the sun about and looking at the impact of your shadows on your site. Okay, just another few tools in terms of viewing this window. If you hold down Shift and use your middle mouse button, it gives you a pan. Okay, so it gives you a 3D orbit, 3D pan. What you might notice is it won't refresh the shadows until I let go. So I let go, just takes a second, and the shadows reappear on there. Okay, so that's quite a useful tool just for quickly moving about your site. As I said before, the scroll wheel will zoom, as you'd expect, as in most software. ZE, shortcut, zoom extents. So a very good way of quickly moving in and out. ZZ quickly zooms in. And I did show you in one of those videos from last week where to find the shortcut commands and how to customize those. So zoom extents, ZZ, zoom in. We also have the view cube, which is this little thing up here in the top right. And this is quite useful. You can click and drag that view cube, and it will pan around. You can also, if you just click once on any point on that cube, it will take you to that predefined view, which can be quite useful if you've been panning around and you sort of lost where you started. It will take you straight back. So that's handy. You can also click on the faces. It will take you into a top view, for example. You can click on the Click on one of the side faces and it will take you to an elevation. Okay. So that's a useful tool, and I suggest you just have a little play about with that. You've also got some tools over on this side. Full navigation wheel, mini navigation wheel. There's some different ways of viewing that navigation tool. Now I'm just going to leave you to play about with those. Okay, they're quite straightforward. Okay, just ZE zoom extents there. If we click on our sun path and we go over to properties, so I clicked on the properties tab down in the bottom left hand corner. You can scale your sun path. So if I put that to 100%, it will just shrink down a bit. I'll put that to 200. It'll just get a bit bigger. If you have to hit apply. Okay. Now, thing to bear in mind is that's just a graphical change. Obviously, the sun is so far away from the Earth that we consider the sun's rays to be parallel. Okay. I mean, so it's not. Although when you sort of look on the sun path here, it kind of suggests that the sun is here, just almost within touch. But obviously, it's not. Okay, it's very far away. I'm sure you knew that. Okay, but it just gives you this sort of graphical interface, just to help you kind of navigate around that. Okay, a few other settings in here. If I just zoom in a little bit, and if you click on one of these text boxes, this is the time, you can actually input a specific time, or you can use the little arrows. Okay, and that will move that sun. In this instance, I moved it to 10:15, and it will move it to that precise time. Equally, if you click in the date here, again, it takes you into a sort of calendar, and you can again accurately set the date in there. And it's quite interesting here. If I'm just going to change my view slightly. If we just do that again and look at the impact on the sun path. I'll go back to middle of June. Okay, so you see the sun path moves up in the sky, and if we move that into winter, you see the impact on the sun path. So huge difference between our middle of summer sun and our middle of winter sun. Okay, just going to put that back, put that into the equinox. Don't worry too much about. You see, it's giving me a 2010. Don't worry about that because the sun doesn't change year on year. So I guess 2010 is when this product was released. You can presumably you can change it, but it won't make any difference. Okay, so that's using the more sort of hands-on, intuitive sun editor, just to play with the sun, move it around, and use that to very quickly get some design iterations, test your model. Now, what you might do is, for example, in the early design stage, you might then say, you might go to your model, you might change it, and so we've made that top of that building higher. Let's just look around, and you immediately see a sort of implication there on the front of the Arts Tower that we are starting to get quite a substantial shadow on the main entrance of the Arts Tower. So already we could use that as a tool. Very early stage. If we're a bit concerned about that, let's drag that sun around. And let's just keep your eye on the shadow here on the Arts Tower. That's what I'm sort of interested in. And let's just drag that sun. And let's just have a look. So it's kind of telling us that from, what was that, from about 9 o'clock in the morning through to about 12 o'clock we're in March, that we are potentially creating this shadow on the front entrance of the Arts Tower. And I think, already as a designer you might start to think, I'm not sure if that's really acceptable, because people walk out of the Arts Tower, they're in shade in the morning. So very sort of quick, in terms of quick kind of iterative testing. Now what you might then do is just quickly drop that building height down again. And again, look at the implication on the shadow there. Let's just drag that sun back. And, again, you're very quickly be able to make some design decisions based on the path of the sun. Okay. Next thing we'll do, we're just going to look at a few graphic display settings. Okay, now if we go down to the bottom left of any window in Revit, you have a whole series of graphic display settings. And the first one here is the scale. You can change that to any scale you want. 1 to 500 is typically a good scale for a sort of site model. You have detail level, coarse, medium, and fine. Now for our purposes, for site modeling, it probably won't make any difference, because all of the site model elements will appear the same, whether they are coarse, medium, or fine. What this is really for is when you start to model a building, any element in that building, you can define that element to appear differently depending on coarse, medium, or fine. And this is very useful because it means you can, in one drawing you might want to see all of the detail, and in another drawing you might want it to be a much more kind of schematic type of drawing. Okay. Next one is the different types of shading, different types of rendering. Now if we go through wireframe, turns it to a wireframe, much quicker. Software can operate much quicker. You see through everything. That can be very useful when you're modeling. Hidden line. Again, it's a sort of hidden line render. It has shadows as well. Shaded. Similar, but you get a slightly better range of shadows. Consistent colors, we'll use material properties. And then we move into realistic and ray trace, which I'm not going to click on those now because that will start to render this view, and we're not interested in that at the moment. Okay, if we also go there to graphic display options, just drag that into the middle, we have a whole range of other options. So we've got the wireframe, hidden line, shaded as before. We've got show edges. So you can switch the edges off, switch the edges on. You can play around with the transparency of those edges. You can play around with the way those edges appear. Okay. Go into shadows. You can first of all tell it whether to cast shadows or not. So if we switch shadows off, there are no shadows. Put those back on. Ambient shadows. What ambient shadows is doing is it's just giving you a small amount of reflected light. So when you have ambient shadows off, you simply get either full sun or shadow. With the ambient shadows, you get a little bit of light bouncing, and it gives you a slightly sort of softer feel to the view. Okay. Now the thing to bear in mind is, in this session, we're concerned with analysis. So I'm not really teaching you here how to produce rendered images. This is purely about analysing the sun. Now in a session in 2 weeks' time, we will look at rendering images. and then we'll come back into these settings. Okay, under lighting, here you have some sliders for the strength of your sun and the strength of your ambient light and the strength of your shadows. So you can play about with that. The thing to bear in mind is this is simply a graphic display. Okay, it's not making any difference in terms of the actual properties of the sun. Okay. We've then got photographic exposure, which is only of a concern if you are rendering. And we have background. Sorry, I can't have talking while I'm talking. You have background, you can put a gradient, you can put a sky in, you can put an image in. I'm just going to leave that off. So you have a range of settings in there, just in terms of graphics. Next button along. Remember that I am recording this, okay? So you don't need to be too worried about, writing down what I'm saying. Next one is simply the shadows. Shadows on, shadows off. Quite simple. And I'm not going to move into the other settings yet because they're more about rendering. Okay. Right. So we've learned how to simulate the sun on our model. We've learned how to move that sun around. We've learned how to change the view and how to start to use that as a design tool. Now what I'm going to move on to is how to actually predefine some views and start to output the analysis in terms of if you needed a report or if you're producing images for presentation. Okay. So what I'm going to do first of all is just show you how to make a perspective view. You might notice the view we have here, which is the default Revit 3D view, is not a perspective view. Okay, so there's no perspective in this view, and often that's perfectly fine. Now, to make a perspective view, go back into your project browser here, and you need to first of all go into a plan. So we need to go into a plan view. Okay? You can't make a perspective when you're not in a plan view. So we go into our plan view and we go under our view tab at the top here, 3D view, camera. And you probably just see that I now have this little camera icon trying to keep up with my mouse. Okay? He's a bit slow. There he is. And what we're going to do is we'll just position it roughly at first. Click and drag. Okay, click and drag. Click again. Are you happy with that? Now if I just do WT, Windows Tile, I'm just going to shut down some of these other windows that we're not using anymore. WT, ZA. So we can now view what we've got in both views at the same time. So on the right, we've got our plan view with our camera, and on the left, we've got our 3D view that we've created. Okay? And what you might notice in the 3D view is we're not seeing any buildings. And this is because the default in Revit in any view is that the 3D mass objects do not show. So VV, it's always VV will give you the settings, the visibility graphic settings. And if you just look over here under mass, we are switched off. Switch that on. Okay. And our buildings are appearing again. I'm just going to change that into a shaded view. Just save that. So I've changed that into a shaded view and I'll put the shadows on. Okay, so we've got our perspective. Now, if you go back into your plan view over here, on the right, you can't see your camera anymore. And that catches you out a bit because you now want to perhaps pick up that camera and move it, and you've lost it. You can't find it. What you have to do is go back into your perspective and click on the box which is bounding your perspective, and your camera appears again. Okay. If you click in the view on the right now, you can now click on your camera and move it about. Okay. So there's positioning camera. Now, if we now look at the properties of that camera, go back to our properties over here. Few things about cameras is cameras do have what is called a far clip, and what that means is you can tell that camera to stop viewing beyond a certain point. So if I drag that clip of that camera back, if you look in the perspective on the left, those buildings behind that view no longer show. Just drag that back. So that's one to watch out for. That can catch you out. You also have, over here, you have an eye elevation for your camera, and you have a target elevation. So what height do you want that camera at, and what height do you want it to look at? So you can manually, if I go over here to eye elevation, and I'll just change that, and click apply. We've just changed that angle of the camera. You can also, if you go into the perspective view and use your shift and pan, you can also just move the camera about in that perspective, like that. Okay. So we've got a view there, and the only other thing I really want to do is just make that the crop of that perspective a bit wider so that it's fitting in all of our sight. So I just click on these little drag buttons. Let's just drag those out a bit. Okay, and what you'll notice, if you keep an eye on the camera in the right, as I'm doing that, it's actually changing the lens width of that camera to make it a bit wider. Okay. So there's our perspective view. Now what I want to do now is go back into the project browser over here, and that view is called 3D View 3, as you can see, but that's not very good name. I'll easily forget what that is. So let's first of all right click on it and rename it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that 22nd of June Solar Study. So that we have this intention that that's what that view will be. That will be our 22nd of June. Okay. So good that I've saved it, because now if we go into other views, we can go back to that view. Okay. Looking at this view, we've got a few, just zoom in a bit there, we've got a few slightly odd things. We've got this shadow on the floor, and we've got this line. Now that line is just a construction element. So if I tab click on that, again, it was in one of those videos last week, when you click tab and then select, it selects all the joined elements. I've selected that, right click on it, hide in view, elements. So all I want to do is just hide those lines. I haven't deleted them, I'm just hiding them. If you want to get them back again, if you go to down in the bottom of your window, reveal hidden elements, takes you into another sort of editing window where you could see those elements that you hid. If you select on one, you can unhide it. Okay. Okay, let's just go back to that. Now the other thing we've got is this rather odd shadow on the floor. If I just zoom out there. If we go into our sun settings, that is being created here. Ground plane at level whatever you want. So it's casting a shadow on our ground plane. Now because our site is at about 120 meters above sea level, our ground plane is 120 meters below that at the moment. So we're getting this sort of odd shadow. Now I'm just going to switch that off, because I don't need that. So now we have a much better view where the only shadows we're getting are the kind of real shadows of our site. Right, so let's go back again into our sun settings. And the first thing here is that we wanted this to be the 22nd of June. So if we go on to single day here, you have a number of presets in terms of a single day. So you can pick any of these presets. And in fact, the summer solstice would have been the one we wanted, but we'll just input it manually. So let's go over to our date. We can use the little calendar, 22nd of June. And here it's asking what time scales are you interested in? What do you want to look at? So let's say for the purposes of our building, let's say we're interested from 9 o'clock in the morning, and because this building is a sort of cafe building open into the evening, maybe we're kind of interested through till 10 o'clock at night. It depends what the building is. If you were not interested in the evening, you could limit that. There is this button here, sunrise to sunset. Okay, I'll leave that. Just turn off our ground plane again. So we've defined that on that particular day, the middle of summer, we want to analyze from 9 o'clock in the morning through to 10 o'clock at night. And the time interval is the frequency that you want to run that simulation. Now, I would have thought every hour would be okay. You may even do it, you may do it more detailed than that, but typically I would say if you're simulating every hour, that's a good frequency. Okay, now what I should have done, well, I'll do it now. If I now save the settings there, and we'll call that 22nd of June, let's call it Sim01. So those settings are now created here so that we can very easily go back to those settings. Okay, we'll click Apply and OK. Right. So we're almost ready to start to simulate some results. But actually, I think just before we do that, let's just check that this is looking how we want it. Now, what I've noticed here is we've not got any ambient shadows, or at least the ambient shadows are very weak if we have got them. So let's go back into our graphic display options. Let's just have a look through our settings here. So let's switch the ambient shadows on. Let's go back into lighting. By default, the ambient light settings are set to 0, so you wouldn't see anything. So I've put the ambient light up. Shadows perhaps a little bit too dark. Let's just put those down a bit. Maybe that's okay. So that's looking more like how we want to see it. Just maximize that. So there's our view all ready to go. Okay, so now let's run the simulation and let's export some results from that. So what we do, I'll just hit save actually first, just to be sure. Okay, and we go under our Revit button, top left, click on that, and we've got export. So we've got a number of options, and we need to go down to images and animations. Now what you can do here, if you click on image, it will export that image straight out to a JPEG. So let's just go on to that. So first of all is just to check where it's putting that file. Let's create a new folder. (22nd of June) simulation. Okay. File type JPEG, yeah. Okay. And we've got a few options here. Let's select the visible portion of the current window here. That's what we will see. And by default, it gives you quite a low resolution, 512 pixels wide, which is not very many. I'm going to change that to 2000 pixels wide. You've got some quality settings for your JPEGs, medium, raster image quality. Again, you can change that, but really that's just defined by how many pixels you've got. Okay, let's click OK on that. And let's go and find it. So there's that image. That looks a bit small to me. That's not right. I'll go back and do that again. That is not right. You know, it's funny. I was practicing this last night to make sure that I could remember everything. Everything's fine. Everything's great. Always happens. So, export, images and animations, image. Okay, it's putting it there. Okay, yes, replace that. Visible portion. I've accidentally changed it to this zoomed 50%. Let's go back, 2000 pixels. Do you want to replace the existing file? Yes, I do. Now, fingers crossed. Yeah, okay. So we've got a reasonable resolution there. And you could set that resolution higher if you wanted. Okay, that was 2000 pixels wide, which, bearing in mind that in a report, you'd probably be shrinking that to about, that sort of size on the page. Okay, so that was just exporting a single still image. Now, you could in Revit duplicate this view and periodically change that sun. And you could rename, so you could duplicate that view and you could rename it 9 o'clock, rename it 12 o'clock, and change that sun. And that's quite good way of working. But there is a slightly, probably quicker way of doing it, which is if we go back to our export, images and animations, and we click on a solar study this time. Okay. And what this is now going to do is it's going to export all of those hour slots throughout the day that we selected. So let's just have a look. Output length, all frames. So we want everything. Visual style, well, we've already defined that, but it does give you the option of changing the visual style again, but we'll leave it alone. Dimensions, again, let's change our width. Okay, so let's make it a sort of decent size in terms of pixels. And you have this option, include time and date stamp. That's handy because it will put, on each image it will tell you what time of day it is. Okay, click OK. And we now have some options. Now it will, if you let it, it will export this as an AVI. So as a movie file, an image file, a movie file, sorry. Now, I tend to find that not so useful because you obviously can't then put a movie file into a report. Well, you can, but it's not as straightforward. Okay, but you might find that useful. You can play about with that. You have some options. Sorry, those are the options you already have. It does export by default some very large AVI files, but obviously you could then take those into a video editor if you wanted. But what I'm going to do is not do that. I just want to export some JPEGs. So I've selected JPEG again, click Save, and it will now start going through the day. See the sun's moving about, and it's exporting each one of those time frames. Okay, that should be done. So if we go back into our June simulation, here they all are. I'm just going to delete that one that we did earlier. Useful to put them in a folder or you'll end up with images everywhere. If you just click on that one. So you see it's put at the top here, 1 of 14, June 22nd, 2010, 9 o'clock. And if we just scroll through those images, it's moving that sun around throughout the day. Okay, and it's exporting each one of those images as a separate JPEG. So now in terms of you inputting these into a report, this is obviously very easy now because you can you can drag these into a document, put them in a report. Very, very, very useful, very straightforward. The important thing here was that we got our view all set up correctly before we started exporting. So let's just go back into Revit very quickly before the break. What you could then do is we have our view over here. If we right click on that, we get the option Duplicate View. And we're having two options, Duplicate or Duplicate with Detailing. The only difference is that Duplicate with Detailing will bring through any annotations. So if you'd added any text, any dimensions, it would also duplicate those. So let's just duplicate that. There's our copy. Okay. Let's rename it. And let's call that 22nd of March, which is our equinox, equal day, equal night. Okay. So we've saved that, but it still thinks it's the 22nd of June. Go back into our sun settings. We have this preset, 22nd of June, simulation 1. Let's duplicate that down here. And let's rename it. 22nd of March. Okay. If we go back up to our date, up here, it obviously still thinks that's in June. So let's just change that to 22nd of March. Sorry, I'm rushing a bit now because the break's coming up, but you can always re-watch this again at home. Apply. Okay, and let's save before we do anything, just in case. And now let's export 22nd of March. Export images and animations, solar study. Okay, we want it 2000 pixels wide as before. We want to include the time and date on that. Okay. Let's make a new folder. 22nd of March. And again, we don't really want an AVI. Let's just have JPEGs. Save that. we'd left the same time scale, so it's now still simulating through to 10 o'clock at night. Obviously in March it's dark that time. Go back into our 22nd of March, and now you see we have the correct time, 22nd of March, and again as we move through our day, that sun moves around throughout the simulation. Okay. I mean, what I find quite useful as well, when you look at if you watch the InDesign tutorial, because it's very easy if you're using InDesign and you're inserting these images, it's very easy to crop off this text. So if that text, if you don't want that to appear in your report, you can just crop that off quite easily.